So, good morning everyone, and welcome to this lecture at 9 a.m. on a Thursday morning. I am impressed that you guys showed up this early, so we will do our very best to impress you in our talk. My name is Eyjólfur Gunnarsson. I'm the lead economist at CCP, working on EVE Online and other projects that we have in development, and with me is...
I'm Einar. I've been working for EVE Online as a GM for 7 years, cleaning up the mess, basically.
So together we're going to present to you the art of war against RMT elements in your game by telling you about a campaign that we have been running now for about a year or so. Now, real money trade. There are basically three questions that we need to ask ourselves before we head into the real money trade fighting. We need to define what we are fighting against and why. So the fundamental question must be, why does real money trade exist? It's been a problem within computer games, MMO specifically, since the launch of Ultima Online and even before that. So it's been around. Why does it exist? The second question is, why go after it? If it's been around for this long time, I mean, what's the need to go after it? And the third one, well, if you decide to go after it, what is the best way to do so? So these will be the three basic questions that we are looking for answers for today. So, why does real money trade exist? In general, players want more stuff. That's just as easy as that. And to get more stuff, they need currency. They might want items, they might want skills and so on, but they can always get that stuff for currency. So there is a demand for currency. And that demand is usually fulfilled by paying real life money for these currency in order to get stuff. In short, this is very, very basic supply and demand as in any other economic system. And no matter how much you dislike the action, there is always somebody out there that will answer that demand if it exists. And therefore, you have real money traders in your game. That's the reason why. It's very basic. There is demand, it's being fulfilled. Now, if it is so basic, and if it's been around, why go after it? There are several reasons for going after it, and the first one is that it usually breaks the gameplay in one way or the other. Usage of bots is very common among those that are farming your game. And it's an obvious game-breaking thing to have the bots in the game. If you are an MMO player and you are in an area with 100 bots but not 100 people, well, it's not really an MMO, is it? You're not playing against other people, so you want that out of your system. They are also very good at finding any kind of ways to exploit your game, and they will farm that very fast, which can have significant economic impact on your game. So basically, by injecting a lot of currency through ways that you didn't even imagine that were possible. And it doesn't necessarily have to be currency. Sometimes it's items and other stuff that they're collecting at a much faster pace than you anticipated. And that can really break your game very fast if you're not on top of that. This last point is actually quite interesting, and I must say that we at CCP severely underestimated this point. In fact, their game behavior, or the way that they move around in your game, causes additional load on your system, both in terms of hardware, but also in terms of customer support. Now, the customer support part is quite obvious. You got increased petitions, other players complaining about spamming, complaining about RMTs in the system, etc. But the hardware one was something that was really surprising to us, and you will see that a little bit later on. And last but not least, unfortunately, RMTs in MMOs are often using illegal methods. And unfortunately, majority of them are. This includes credit card fraud, hacking accounts, and using other means to obtain passwords from our customers, logging into their accounts, stealing the stuff, and selling it. And that can really hurt your subscriber base. So these are the reasons why you should go after RMTs that are farming your game. Now, but what is then the best way to do so? As I mentioned to you earlier, you really need to address both sides of the coin. You cannot just attack the supply. You need to attack the demand at the same time. When we're talking about the supply, you go in and you find the RMTs. You remove them out of the game and you use all the known methods that the MMOs companies have been using in the past few years. But how do you tackle the demand? Well, you need to provide them with an alternative. The demand is there. You cannot deny that. So you need to be able to give them an alternative, but that alternative cannot break the game. It cannot be game breaking. It needs to be part of the game. And we think that we found a way that actually attacks both sides. And up there you have Eve, which is our heart, our little love at CCP. And down there you have the RMTers trying to break into that little world. And our traditional way of handling that is to fight them with our GMs like Einar here, that have been battling and working on the battlefields of RMTs for the past 6 or 7 years. But you need a pincer attack. You need to flank this. And that's why we created the PLEX, or Pilot License Extension Program, which is answering the demand without breaking the gameplay. And by attacking them from both sides, you're actually hurting them a lot more than when you're only fighting them on the supply side. So what is this PLEX? PLEX has now been around for a little bit over a year. We have not been very vocal about it. We've been moving this slowly into the game and testing it to see how it works. And it has been very well received by the players. Here is an in-game advertisement, or not in-game, on the login screen advertisement that basically tells a little story about Joe who did business with the enemy. And in return, he lost his ships, his ISK, and his account when the enemy broke into his account and stole it. And we are encouraging people to learn from Joe's mistake and trade in PLEX instead. So a PLEX is simply a 30-day pilot's license extension, which simply means a subscription. You can actually go into the game and use in-game currency to buy 30-day subscription. If you're a player that plays the game a lot and you have a lot of ISK, the in-game currency, you can actually play the game for free, quote and unquote on the free, because an economist, I know that nothing is free and you just use your time instead of your money. And this is basically a self-balancing mechanism because this item is sold on the already efficient EVE market. It's an in-game item. So you take the time code and you make an in-game item out of it, which you can then sell on the market. So players that have a lot of ISK, they can buy the time code and don't need real life currency. They don't even need a credit card. Players with real life currency but very little time, they can buy this. They can sell these time codes, gain ISK, and use that ISK to have items, usually fancy spaceships that get blown up in a very few seconds. But that's their way of playing. That's what they like to do. And think about it. When the bots are being used, there are computer identities within the game that you cannot really do anything with or play with. These are just macros running around the system like mad. When you have people enter the game, it's a much richer environment. And as we know with any MMO, the bigger the population, the more interesting the game or the environment as such. So if you exclude the subscribers that don't have time to play your game, you actually have a smaller world than if you cater to both playstyles. So what the Plex system does, Plex doesn't create any currency in the game. A player just plays a regular gameplay, he's good at it, and he gains currency. He uses that currency to buy time codes. That currency is not being created per se, like through an exploit or illegal use of any of the in-game mechanisms. He's just playing his game, and then he's handing over currency to another player who is using that currency for his game style. So it does not increase the amount of currency within the game. Hence, it's not game breaking, and it's actually supporting the MMO environment. How many of you in here have about 4 or 5 hours per day to play MMOs? Okay, I saw one hand come up. Now that would be, if that would be the only requirement to play the game, that would be a small world, right? How many of you have a half an hour? See? Much richer world. So, another key point is that there is no value taken out of EVE. They pay the time codes, and they buy the time codes from either a reseller or directly from ourselves. That money comes to the publisher, who can then use the money to evolve the game further. So it's a complete win-win situation for all parties, except the RMTs. And this thing about the open versus the closed world is a really important one. Now, excuse me. You can design your world to be an open world. And when I'm putting it up here black and white, it's not bad and good. It's simply you have to think about your design. In an open world, you allow currency to go into the game. It exchanges hands and creates value in any kind of transactions. And it can then be taken out of the game again. Second Life, Project Entropia. These are designed around this kind of behavior, absolutely and perfectly normal. But you have to think about that in your design. And as the example with Second Life, you cannot have anyone else than a real-life banking institution run a bank within Second Life, because they're dealing with real-life cash. In a closed world, even though you add additional value into the game by somebody buying a time code, etc., it just stays there. And the world as such gets richer, but nobody can take the value out. This also allows us to have different regulations within that world than we can in real life. As an example, in EVE, you can actually cheat on your friends. You can steal from the bank without us putting any restrictions on your behavior. If you want to be nasty and take money away from your friend, go ahead. It just is something that you do want to do in your gameplay. This is something we could not do if we had real life currency within the world. So it's a fundamental decision that you have to make about your world. Is it going to be an open world or a closed world? And it doesn't matter what kind of model you're talking about. Subscription model, free-to-play model, etc. That is not the issue. But it's still a fundamental decision to make. And EVE is truly a closed system. So even though we have here the sinks and faucets from CCP, here on your right, the system as such is closed. And nobody should be able to take value out of it. So anything that goes into it goes into making EVE. And this is our constant fight when we're fighting with the RMTs. We are constantly fighting of keeping it closed. And finally, on the Plex, here is an in-game market graph. The yellow dots are showing the average price for the day. The red line and green line are showing us the moving average over 5 and 20 days. And then the green columns down here are showing the volume. This is in the main market hub in Jeddah. About 60-70% of all trade in Plexus happens in that system. And you can say that today there are more than 1,000 time codes being traded on any given day. The price has been quite stable after a bubble in last June, and currently it's stable around 260 to 280 million ISK. So we have an item that functions like any other item within the game. In terms of total trade value, it's become one of the most important items in EVE. And it's been very well received by the player base, who understand this need, this demand for currency cannot be avoided. But the system is designed not to break the gameplay. Now, so this is kind of the, we can say, theory, the methodology that we are thinking about when we are thinking about RMT. So what about RMT and EVE? EVE is an massively online game. Most of you probably know it. Single-shard sandbox-style design with a player-driven economy. And therefore, for us, it's very important to realize the extent of RMT within the game. From the beginning, we have been constantly fighting RMT, but we realized that we needed a much better battle plan. It was just not enough to go out there and ban and ban and ban. We needed to understand what was going on and how we could fight it. And we needed better tools. Yes, Einar, what did we need?
That's what we needed. So now that we were ready to go and really focus on dealing with this problem, we sat down and discussed what we should be doing to tackle it. And the first thing we needed to do was to dedicate resources to work on this problem. A lot of people in the company have been involved from the start, from GM grunts to people with C's in their title. But the main force has come from the GM team and the research team, as well as software. So we had a good, probably 10 people working on this. Another thing we needed to do, we needed to find out what they were doing and exactly how they were doing it. So we had to go and look at the behaviors and catalog and create all kinds of search parameters and stuff. And we also needed some tools to be able to do this quickly, tools and methods. So we started working on that also. And we also needed to find some parameters to monitor for before and after effect to see how it's going and what the results were. The work really started in the fall of 2008, and we created some search tools and all kinds of methods, and did a little test run, a few little test runs actually, but a pretty substantial one on March 10th, where we banned 3,000 accounts. Then after that we went back to the drawing board and tuned our tools and methods for better effect. And then on June 22nd we went ahead and banned 6,200 accounts in one go. And since then we've been applying constant pressure on looking for them and removing them from the game as soon as we find them. And also we've been pushing Plex as an alternative to the players with all kinds of blogs and adverts like the one on the login screen we saw earlier. So what happened? We saw some very interesting effects or impact, a lot of changes and stuff that we found very interesting. They manifested in hardware performance and the player experience generally, and also in the economic system, of course. So on the hardware side, which was the biggest surprise for all, was that on this diagram we see June 22nd there, and this purple line represents the average CPU per user. And even though we were just banning just under 2% of active accounts, the CPU per user dropped by 30%, which was pretty amazing, and everyone was just, picking their jaws from the floor to that one. So that was a key factor in the success we found. The players also, they found their existence much easier to. A lot of systems that have been clogged up by botters and farmers were suddenly open for them to play in. And we did the same thing happened. This is one of the systems, a typical system for the mission hubs, Ingun. And we see it dropped on March 10th with a test run, but then they just came back. And then on June 22nd, they also dropped from 160, 70 on average to 10. And we've been working on removing them and keeping the system, as well as the other systems, fairly clean of RMT activity. So it's overall a much better world for the players, and systems like this with good agents and stuff are now being used by actual players instead of bots, which is a good thing. All of this, we have banned a lot of accounts, and to date, since June 22nd, we banned close to 30,000 paying accounts, which is a little misleading actually, because it's basically the same users again and again coming with new accounts. So this does not actually represent 30,000 subscribers or customers. Impact on the market. We were very interested in monitoring that, and many people were a little worried that we would be, affecting the market in a negative way. But we only saw maybe a 10% drop in total market activity, or the ISK traded per day, which is not very significant. Still we can, it's visible, but not a big problem at all. On this slide we can see a little more detail what happened. But the markets have pretty much corrected themselves again with more players coming in and more activity. A lot of items, we had different impact on different items because we have all kinds of activity that affects different items. So we have mission runners and macro miners and ratters and all kinds of stuff, and all of these activities affect different items. It's minerals, loot, mission rewards and stuff. One of the item categories that was very heavily affected were the implants. These are items that people get from working with agents, and we saw this. The price doubled in a few days, and the volume dropped by significantly. Another type of item is salvage materials. These are items that are salvaged from shipwrecks and sold on the market. We see that in June, after June, the price went up considerably and the volume went down also. But then later on, the requirements for these things are used to build rigs on ships, and the requirements would change, so that change had much more effect on the price than what we had done. This is a mineral, it's titanium. It's a basic element in Eve. Everything is built out of titanium, and we were a little worried that we would see some dramatic effects on that, but nothing really happened with what we did over here. But then around the same time, there was a spawn rate tuning done on that, which lowered the price considerably. So we did see big changes on certain items, especially the mission-related items. Relatively small overall changes on the markets, but still significant. And game balancing has had much larger impact on a lot of stuff than what we had been doing.
Yes, we're going to change the formula a little bit. So we are experimenting with you here. Before we make our closing remarks, we actually want to take questions now, and hopefully be able to get into some dialogue. So, if you guys have any questions, now is the time to shoot.
Yeah, there's a mic over there. If you want to walk up to that and ask us your questions.
So, does it work? Okay. How many hours does it actually take for average players to earn enough ISK to buy the 30-day pass?
It depends on what level of. If you're doing missions, level 4 missions, it's not that long. If you're doing, it depends on what skills you have and what kind of ships and all that. But that doesn't really take that long. People can do that in a few days, usually, without too much trouble.
So the experienced players, actually, it's fairly easy for them to play.
Yes, it is.
Well, I would say relatively easy. It is a known fact within E that you can make somewhere between 5 and 10 million ISK per hour in your first week. You can actually make more ISK per hour once you have gained skills, as Einar said. So you can definitely earn enough money within a week to buy your time code.
Do you know if any secondary markets have emerged to convert game cards back into cash that would allow farmers to farm ISK, buy a card, and then convert it back into, I don't know how much the card costs, like $15, but then get $14 back for the card in the secondary market?
Einar,
we've seen them sell Plex for real money, and that something has happened. So they do that.
Indeed, and one of the things that we pointed out here earlier was that this is a constant battle. It is something that you have to keep up the pressure, and they will find other ways trying to tackle your system. However, with this system, it's much more obvious that what they're doing, and we've been able to keep them under wraps, we could say. Now, unfortunately, what they turned more towards hacking once we closed this way for them. So hacking is something we've been battling quite a bit in the past couple of months.
So I see how this thing works great to stop currency trading in RMT. How much impact has this had on buying characters, buying corporations, cash for starting position?
I would say that we have had secure card trading system for how long now, Einar?
4 years probably or
Yeah.
something.
So there is a relatively well-established system in that one, and we have not seen a big impact on that, or what?
No, nothing out of the ordinary really. Just business as usual. The only thing we're seeing is, cards from hacked accounts being sold, which is total bitch to deal with. So.
But that's usually, as I said, through our secure system, so we can trace that back much easier.
How was your false positive rate when you started banning players?
It's very low. We have pretty good tools to work with, and everything is double checked. So there have been some false positives, but they're few and far between.
Yes, and we willingly adjusted our parameters such that the probability of having a false positive was very, very low. We could have probably put more severe impact on the RMTers by increasing those parameters. Yes,
and people can always appeal and will, look at their case again and again. So that's nobody's totally doomed forever if they're a false positive.
I was wondering how Plex has affected your fraud rate. I can give you an example that I've seen in my company. We tried selling game time cards, and what we saw was that there was suddenly a massive increase in fraud. They were buying the game time cards and cashing them out on eBay, and we're left with a player with a time card. We haven't got any money, and the gold farmers have taken the money.
You want to take this one?
Well, we haven't really seen any large changes in this at all. Not that we've come across. They've been doing that in some, a little bit all the time since Plex started, and we haven't really had any increase in problems with this.
And in general, we have had significant increase in revenues by selling time codes that are then turned into Plex. But you can still buy time codes and apply them directly. You don't have to turn it into Plex. And that market is still ongoing. So it has been a net increase for us, which has, as I said earlier, by having it this way, you are tapping into a market that's already there. It's just you that are getting the revenue, but not the RMTers.
We had some problems with, we're also selling Plex on the website, and we did have some problems at first with credit card fraud on that, but we did some upgrades to our system, so that's pretty much.
Yeah, I think you can actually tell them what you did. I mean, that's
we just applied an hour delay on delivery, and that totally wiped out all the fraud in one day, which was pretty good.
Yeah. Which is suboptimal for any customer support and customer service. You don't want your customer to wait for an hour, but we deemed that while we were testing the system, it was acceptable to have this delay while we were figuring this out, and as he said, it got rid of the problem.
And those sales are monitored, so we are able to intercept bad transactions and get rid of them before they actually are delivered into the game.
What distribution of your accounts are paid for with normal credit cards, normal GTCs versus Plexes now? And what was the ramp up from when Plex was first introduced, where previously it was just the GTCs either traded in-game or on the forums?
Unfortunately, we cannot really comment on that in public, but come up and talk to me later. More questions? No? Okay, Einar, I think I'll just wrap this up then. So how did you like this new format of having the questions in the middle of the talk instead of waiting until the end and the presenter doesn't do his time management properly and then there's no time for questions? Should I do it again next year or? Yeah. It's 9:30, sorry, yes. Shouldn't be do testing on people that show up at 9 o'clock. I apologize. So, what are the lessons that we learned throughout the operation on Holy Rates? Number one, this is a crucial factor. You have to be committed. You cannot do this and say, I'm going to go out there and tell the guys to do this for a week, and then a problem shows up, and then you say, okay, guys, go solve that problem. That doesn't work, because as soon as you let the grid go, it grows again. And you saw it quite easily when we had the population numbers in Ingun. We did our test on March 10th, and were able to wipe them out in one system. And then we stepped back and did nothing and watched what was going on, and we saw them jump in right away. They even had characters that they had trained, but were inactive. And then they opened up those new characters right away. Now, finding the right parameters requires also dedicated time and resources. So you have to do your research, you have to do your homework. And that's constantly testing back and forth. And we cannot tell you which parameters these are that we were found in our case. However, if you are an MMO publisher or an MMO developer, you can come and talk to us, and we see what kind of information we can share with you on that one. But in public, we cannot tell you which parameters these were. But it was quite an interesting. It was actually, for me, as an economist, was a fun exercise trying to match these behavioral patterns to different playstyles. And then you have to be sure that you have all the information. So you've done your testing, you gained your parameters, you're almost absolutely sure. You do a little bit of test, and then you review the entire thing. What I'm basically describing to you is like any other research done at an academic level. You have a hypothesis, you set up the model, you test the parameters, you review your results, and then you go out again. It's a systematic, methodological approach. And then strike heavily. It's like in any other war. The offense must be hard-hitting from the beginning. You have to send out a very strict message. Because they will be back. And we saw it in our presentation yesterday. Unfortunately, I forgot the presenter's name. They were talking here yesterday between 3 and 4 o'clock. And that was one of the key points that he pointed out. That Patrick, that's right. Thank you. So I would look up that lecture as well, because interestingly enough, he pointed out Plex as one of the tools that you can use to fight against RMT. So we are pleased to see that others are picking it up and understanding what the Plex is. And finally, mentioning the Plex, you cannot avoid the demand side. It's been a taboo within the MMO industry for a long time that people can actually buy their advance. And you will have to figure out a system for your own game that doesn't break the gameplay, but does help people with different play styles to come into your game. And as I mentioned earlier, if you can both have hardcore players that can play for hours per day, and others that only have a half an hour a day, if you can have both of them in the world, it is actually a richer world. When I was in Shanghai last summer, I met a guy from a software company, a big software company, and he was an engineer, relatively high level, had no time to play. But he said he loved the Plex system. He could go in there, buy himself a good spaceship, and get blown up right away. And he had a lot of fun with that. And it was actually a significant amount that he was spending per month. And I don't think this breaks the gameplay for the other players, because the fact of the matter is, if you don't have the skills, if you don't have the training to fly the spaceships in EVE, you will actually get blown up. We have some interesting kill mails showing people buying fancy ships and fitting them wrongly, and then another guy in a much smaller ship comes along and blows them out of the space. So it is not game breaking in the sense that people can buy status. Status within EVE Online at least. Now I don't want to say that this fits to all MMOs, but at least within MMO, status is really just earned. It is such a complex game that you really have to learn your status in order to get ahead. So money won't buy you a skill to kill others. Money can buy you fame, though, for being blown up a lot.
It's not game breaking, but hacking and botting definitely are. So it's a much better system. And We're trying to change the behavior of all the buyers, of course, and channeling them into buying Plexes. And it's working out pretty good so far.
So, if there's anything that you should learn from this lecture, it's remembering this picture. We have the love of our lives, our MMOs, our games that we are publishing. We do want to keep them healthy, we do want to keep them alive. And they are being attacked, and you need to defend yourself. But you have to have multiple tools in your toolbox. In our case, for EVE Online, we think that using the Plex and using the GM tools and tactics that we've been using throughout the years, in combination, that will help us to truly have EVE Online forever. So, given the fact that we wrapped this up quite fast, we are willing to have a second Q&A answer. Or you can just come to us and talk to us. Thank you so much for showing up at 9 a.m.